We're going to talk about the time we spend at work. I mean, we must spend more time with our bosses and with our colleagues than we do with our families, right? So being able to open up, to talk about how we feel, to be our true self at work is absolutely crucial. And in this session, we're going to discuss how companies support their staff. We're going to find out what leading employers in Suffolk are doing. And we're also going to discuss this very bizarre year of sitting in front of computer screens at home on Zoom calls saying, hang on, mate, you're on mute. Or as Brad said in our last session, having that satisfaction of dressing in a suit on your top half and having your shell suit bottoms on. Now, what do our panel believe will be the lasting effects on the workplace? What will the new normal look like as we now start to emerge the other side? That's going to be an interesting question to ask. And so let me get on with this and introduce you to our panel. We have Ian White, who's MD at Beckett Investment Management Group and is chair of the Board of Trustees for Suffolk Mind. Ian has worked for many years in the healthcare sector, specifically in companies focused on delivering support for mental health. Alex Ball is operations manager at Stowe Healthcare, who are currently Employer of the Year at the coveted Suffolk Business Awards. So Alex, no doubt, is going to be able to share some exciting stuff with us. Chris Pyburn is the Public Health Manager at Suffolk County Council, and Chris and the team there have been absolutely instrumental in helping us put this event on. So thank you in advance to you, sir. And Claire Arnold is Employment Advisor at Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. And, look at the amazing work that has happened in the NHS over the past, I don't know what it is now, 14, 15 months. Truly exceptional. So it'd be good to get some insight on what they are doing. So let's kick things off. Ian, first of all, a question for you, if I may. And I know when I first sort of started out in my first job here in Suffolk, a good few years ago now, working as a little baby journalist, and it was quite a macho world. And there was certainly this sense of if you had a mental health issue, leave it at the door, mate, and pick it up on your way out. Certainly the words mental health, you would never even utter. You'd never dare mention them in case what people might think of you. I mean, it was a very different world back then. And thankfully now we have moved into a completely different place. But my question to you is, well, why do we need to think about mental health in the workplace?
Well, thank you for inviting me today, Tom, and thanks for the question. It's an interesting point. The reality is, as you say, mental health all of a sudden has become a fashionable thing to talk about. When I worked in mental health 10 years ago now, and you mentioned mental health, as you say, you were treated as slightly quaint, until people smiled and moved on to the next conversation. I mean, then people used to use phrases like our people are our most important asset. We only have one asset, and that's our staff. But what did they actually do about it? Did they truly understand the individuals that they were employing? And the answer is probably no. And what's happened over the last few years is there has become a greater awareness of the whole being, if you like, the whole person, both the physical and emotional needs of that person. And I think what businesses have realised is that if you do not understand both the physical and the emotional needs of an individual, then they're not bringing their best foot forward. You're not bringing the best person to work, if you like. And if they are our only assets, we've actually got to work hard, really hard, at making sure that as employers we can do the best, to ensure the best physical and emotional health for the team. Teams are what makes a business grow, and if the team is not performing well, then you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve as a business.
Absolutely. So Chris, building on that and sort of talking about Ian and his take and culture in the workplace and defining a company culture, we could all put company values on the wall, or we can create an HR policy or a mental health policy in our business. But how do we make it part of the culture, and how do we make it a real living thing?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's one thing, having a duty of care. All employers have a duty of care for their staff, and that's really, really important. Whether they see that through or not is another matter. And you're quite right. It's one thing having the policy around supporting good mental health. It's quite another to put it into practice. So I think it goes with both ways, really. It's seeing from the leadership's perspective and demonstrating that there's a commitment to good mental health and supporting it. And then there's staff supporting one another as well at the same time. So I think that's really, really important. I was involved with a number of businesses. I'm not sure if Beckett's one of them, but a couple of years back with the Chamber of Commerce. And we did it with a big piece of work looking at what would support a good culture of mental health and wellbeing. And we talked then about this word resilience, which isn't perhaps to anyone's liking, but we were looking at what resilience meant and realized there's no one single definition of it. We all think about resilience, about how we bounce back from certain things. And let's face it, we've all had to be very resilient one way or another the last 12 to 14 months because of all of the pressures the coronavirus has put on us. But it's fascinating that for one business, what might be resilience for them is quite different for another. So really, every organization, every employer needs to define what that means for them and what's important to them for it. But I think I agree completely with what Ian said about the whole person. We've got our work selves, we've got our home selves, we're all one person. So, you can't separate the two. So it's an employer's interest just as much as anything else to make sure that there's that environment, that culture that supports good mental health. That's really, really important. And the really fascinating thing about that is, again, over the last 12 to 14 months, that home life and that work life in many ways has blurred somewhat. I've been working at home for that whole period. So for me, home and work are the same, and I can work down the corridor from the rest, where I sleep and everything else. It's quite a different dynamic. And I think that adds some extra complexities as well as opportunities as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's bring Alex in and build on that further. Your organisation, Alex, Stowe Healthcare, Employer of the Year in Suffolk. Congratulations on that. A real champion for employee engagement and positive mental health. But where did you start? I mean, if there are people listening to this now going, well, we'd like to be the next Employer of the Year. Where do you begin?
Thanks, Tom. I think for us, from an employer perspective, it's kind of about clear communication with your staff. They need to understand what's going on. They need to understand the ethos that you're kind of presenting in terms of how we look after their mental health and well-being. And particularly in the last 12 months, during the pandemic, it's been a very frightening time for everyone, with changes coming at us left, right and centre. You'll be well aware with our industry, we get guidance changes all the time. Sometimes within a week we tell them one message and then we have to change that a couple of days later with new guidance. So we've had to be really clear with our communication methods and make staff, if they're aware that we are in the know of what's going on, they feel more comfortable with what we're telling them. So as long as they're comfortable in their role, they can then feel comfortable with what they need to do and what the care they need to deliver for our residents. So we've had lots of new ways of communicating with our staff, obviously, because of the limitations of the pandemic. We've carried on delivering clear weekly messages that come out every week. They're available to all of our staff. We've got good email channels and virtual meetings as well. And in particular for our relatives, I think keeping their mental health and well-being and reducing their anxieties as well, because they've obviously not been able to visit their loved ones for quite some time. We opened up to visits in July, but there was a 3-month period last April, May, June where they weren't able to come in and they didn't have the kind of visual eyes on their loved one. So we had a number of company relatives meetings via Zoom, which it's turned out to be a huge hit. And actually people that couldn't come into the homes have connected in and they've got that knowledge and information and understanding, and it's kind of put their mind at ease. So that's a kind of starting box for us, really, is clear methods of communication and updating staff with the changes that are going on.
Yeah, and that sort of right to reply, I guess, as well. I mean, sort of the voice of the staff and giving them the chance to have that two-way conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of operate a really open door policy in our homes, both from a head office level. So our directors and the company owners are very visually present in the home. Obviously, that had to stop when we had to stop visiting, but we did video blogs, we did we were present at these meetings to let staff know that we are still around, although we're not physically in their homes and around. We are there to support them with things they need. The home management teams, we had a key weekly briefing, and that was all then filtered down to the staff, so they're all in the same amount of know as us. And quite early on, we all of our management teams had mental health first aid training, so they could pick up on the signs, early warning signs that someone might be suffering and struggling.
Yeah, as Chris said earlier on, this kind of working from home thing has had its benefits in terms of communication and authenticity, because we see into each other's homes, don't we now? And you'd never be able to see into the boss's home and see the dog and the cat and the kids in the background beforehand. So I think that's really helped, as Chris was saying and Ian was saying, to break down barriers. Just on getting your voice across, I should just say that if you would like at any point to put a question to our panel, you can do that in the Q&A. So hover over the screen that you're on, type in your question, and at the end of this session, we will throw it open to you, our audience. Claire, let's bring in Claire. Now, the amazing work of the NHS in the pandemic is something that is no doubt going to go down in history. And I guess your people, like the care industry, have experienced things that probably nobody would ever have anticipated. But how did you manage to motivate NHS staff when their mental health, I guess from sheer exhaustion, would have been hugely challenged?
Well, if I just give you a little bit of a context, because I actually work for Wellbeing, which is part of NSFT, and I manage a team of employment advisors. So we do have some NHS staff who might come in and they need help with managing their wellbeing. And I guess we just listen to people. We just listen to their concerns, and we try and help them tease out the issues with employment. We have our own caseloads where we can sit with members of staff, and we can look at the stresses, and we can try and break down those barriers. And obviously things have dramatically changed. I've been very fortunate that our whole service has been uplifted to work remotely. But saying that, we have seen the impact of COVID on other people and staff within the NHS, and we just try and just be supportive and just understand them, I guess, and show that compassion, that empathy, and just look at different ways of working. I think it's made us really adjust to how we assess situations, and just being a little bit more kinder to each other, I think, and understand, and that's been a huge help.
I guess it's been really difficult to be a manager during these times, because how do you do an induction? I mean, you know, how do you train someone, or how do you train someone that you've recruited and you've never even met in the flesh? It's been a bizarre year, hasn't it? Any tips from you, Claire, on, you know, how managers that might make me feeling a little bit browbeaten by all of this can carry on with that resilience?
Yeah, I mean, I actually had three new starters through the time that we were working virtually, and I think it's just preparation, and like Alex said, just explaining to staff, like guiding people through changes, giving them as much information as possible, not to overwhelm people, but I guess formulating sort of so people know what is expected. Their objectives are clear. They know what they're being asked, basically. So give them that control to sort of manage how they understand that role, and then I guess it's empowering them to, you give them all the information, but then you gradually step back and say, well, what do you think? What would your suggestion be for dealing with this situation? And I guess learning from sort of difficulties, learning from mistakes, and using that not to criticize, but just to develop practice, really.
Yeah. Ian, it's been great working from home and using all of the technology, but still the social aspect has been missed. You can't sort of stand and talk to someone in the queue for the coffee bar like we used to. How do you bridge that gap so people still feel included and connected to their workplace?
Well, I think it depends on the organisation, but I can give you some examples of what we've done. I mean, in the press and all you talk about amongst your colleagues, etc., there was always the Zoom quizzes and everything else. That's just such a small small proportion of what you should be doing. The reality is the team were missing one of their emotional needs as being part of a community. That's what they were missing. So, and that was filled with, you know, fun and games, if you like, to try and make them feel part of a club. But I think it goes much further than that. There were other parts of their emotional needs that just weren't being met. They didn't feel in control, for example. You know, life was happening to them, or rather than them running their lives. So, you know, giving them the opportunity to work flexibly, for example. You know, if you're homeschooling, or you've got vulnerable friends and relatives to look after, then just give people the opportunity to work whenever they like during the 24 hours. Gave them a sense of control, and again, help their sense of well-being. Making sure those individuals, it's not just about the fun things, it's also about having a meaning and purpose. So when you're talking to the individuals on a one-to-one basis, as you would do as a normal, you know, colleagues, or as a manager, as a director, whatever it may be, making sure they feel included in the whole picture. You know, making sure they understand that how important their role is and how it fits into the wider picture. We did a lot more company updates than we'd ever done before, because you can on Zoom, can't you? You only need 30 minutes notice, and if it's a good bit of news, you dish it out. I was doing a video every Friday, just on whatever piece of good news I could find. There's no point having a Zoom conversation when everyone's locked at home about something that's not gone so well. You really want to focus on the positives, and again, create that sense of community. So I think there's lots of things that people could do depending on the industry that you're in. It's easy for me. We had 80 office-based staff, and talking to clients via Zoom. So perhaps it was slightly easier for us. But just being aware that it isn't just about Zoom quizzes, etc. It's more. It's a little bit deeper than that for people's emotional needs.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm hearing, you know, communication, big time. Communication, authenticity, being, you know, always on with staff. Here's the golden question. It's one for Chris. And as we now really come out of this, the light at the end of the tunnel, we're putting our sunglasses on because the light is there now. This is good news. All eyes focused on the middle of June. But what does the new normal look like, do you think? And what will be the impact? Do you think it will be one of positivity, one of negativity, or a bit of both on mental health as we now come out of this pandemic?
Nice straightforward question there, Tom. Thank you for that.
Just a little one.
I think it's very hard to generalize, because people will be in all sorts of different contexts and circumstances. So some people I know that we've spoken to in the context of, for example, our mental health first aid network, who've been running all the way through and have had conversations with staff. Some have relatively thrived during the last 12 months or so, have enjoyed the flexibility and freedom that this new way of working has allowed, whether that's homeschooling, whether that's a caring duty, whether that's something else. Others, and I'm using a real generalization here, for example, if they live and work alone, have struggled more because, as we've said before, not meeting up with people in that sort of social context is much, much harder. So I think there are opportunities, there are ways and things that we can learn from this that mean that not everyone will want to rush back into exactly what we had before, and that there are opportunities that will come out from this. I know some of my colleagues at Suffolk County Council have found it helpful to have a sort of this hybrid idea of working, so that some days they can spend some time in the office, albeit socially distanced and with certain safeguards in place, and other times they can work flexibly and remotely from home. So that might point to something that we can look at in sort of post-pandemic world, whenever that's going to be, to say that there might be opportunities to do things in different ways. I know that one of the other opportunities is not feeling the default position is to travel. You know, I know many people, and again, speaking very parochially in the council, but many people feel that they would have to travel to attend meetings. Now, we've seen from how we've worked here that that's not the case. You know, yes, you miss certain things, certain elements of that social aspect and face-to-face contact, but we can do meetings like this via Zoom and Teams and other, you know, clever technology as well. Many things are possible working in this way. So I think that, again, is a real opportunity. And I think the flexibility this has offered so many people is something I think we'll want to keep hold of in some way, shape or form as we go forward. So it will be different for different people, it will be different in different sectors, but I think there's many things that we can see as positives from the way that we've been working. I mean, I don't think that we'd want to return to exactly the way that we did that before.
Yeah, definitely. And Claire, I think you've already got some positive back to work stories that you'd like to share with us this afternoon, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I sort of grabbed my EAs and said, can you send me some positive case studies? But yeah, we've just generally we've had some people who have presented with real issues, especially after Shieldon has possibly been changed, and there's real anxieties about returning back to the workplace. And the employment advisors have been able to work with those people to have those conversations, those difficult conversations with their managers, and have that, to open that dialogue and that communication, and sort of reassess, and like what Chris was saying, looking at the positives, what does work, and not reverting back to that how we used to work. We've had some, like with social distancing, there was issues about people didn't feel safe. So there was in a factory, one of the employment advisors met with the manager, and they looked at changing where people stood on a production line, and that enabled people to feel safe, and they could still be productive. They just tiny changes sometimes can make a huge difference. Just trying to think of more, because we have so many positive stories, but I think that the main outcome we have is that conversation. Sometimes it doesn't have to be a huge reasonable, like a huge adjustment. Sometimes it can just be just a small thing, like the flexibility, and asking, like, can I start a little bit later because of the school run? And yeah, we've had some real good results of people who possibly could have gone off sick or were off sick, but with just a few little changes, they've been able to either stay in employment or go back to employment, and be productive and happy and feel safe.
Great. So lots of positivity around agile working, maybe spending a bit of time in the office, maybe spending some time at home, and getting the best of both worlds. A lot of employers, though, are talking now about ditching the office completely, about saving money, about, closing offices down. There might be a hot desk in a shared office somewhere, but really the reality is, for some, it's going to be home working indefinitely now. A question for you, Alex. What do you think employers need to do to help their staff with their well-being, if that's it? If that is their world from now on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite lucky at the moment. I've done I did a big stint working from home in the first lockdown, but we've kind of adjusted our office, and I've spent quite a lot of time in our head office with our other colleagues at home. I know for me, those kind of 12 weeks at home, when you're working with big teams of people who are all together, sometimes you do kind of feel a bit envious of those people that are going to work every day and being part of that team and seeing one another, and you're kind of stuck doing what you can remotely. But I think what we did as a team was kind of touch in with each other on our kind of management levels to make sure that we were all okay, just not necessarily a work conversation, just a general check-in, and just have a cup of tea together and just chat about what people have been doing. And that's really important if for that remote working group, just to make sure that they are, because it's very easy for those people to fall into the background, and for people to not understand what they're doing or how they're feeling. My colleague as well, she's based up in North Norfolk, so she's quite remote from us anyway, and she kind of felt the same, that you just kind of end up, if you don't touch base and you're not checking in with the team, you kind of do get further and further away. So I think it is about having that regular conversation and touch base. But when we were talking about the mental health first aid for our management teams, we also kind of did a mental health awareness course and training session, and they called it a training session, but actually it was just a kind of go round and just see how everyone's feeling. And then as soon as that one person just starts to say, actually, it's been really tough, I've really struggled with staff queries and that kind of thing, I don't know what to do, I've not got the answers they want, and then another manager says, oh, well, actually I feel the same too. And it's kind of that opening those doors and those conversations and talking to one another about feelings, which a lot of people don't like to do, especially in management positions. You kind of have to be the resilient, tough one that knows all the answers to everything. But actually, at the end of the day, they're all people, and this is a big change for all of us, and the unknown that we're not all experts in. So I think it's kind of leaning on one another when you need to lean on them.
Yeah, I'm just sort of intrigued about.
Tom, could I ask to put a different perspective on that, just to,
Of course.
just to supplement what Alex has been saying? We've taken a slightly different approach at Beckett's, which is to educate all members of staff. It's almost like a compulsory course when you join Beckett's about your emotional and physical needs. And we do that via Suffolk Mind. And so the reason we did that, for many people, it's proved to be one of the most insightful and useful courses they've ever done, because they begin to understand their emotional needs that they have. By educating everyone, and you talk about perhaps working from home permanently, and it causes some emotional distress, if you like. If everybody has got a basic understanding of how their emotional needs are made up and the 9 components of their emotional needs, they can almost use that as a bit of a framework and understand, oh, I'm not getting my need for attention met, or I'm not getting my need for control met, which is why working from home hasn't necessarily been comfortable for everyone. So we've approached it slightly differently in trying to get everyone, and when we've got 80 staff, if you've got thousands of staff, it may be a bit more challenging, but you're still able to do that. Just to get everyone's level of education about their own emotional well-being up to a certain level. And there's almost, if you've got that certain amount of education, there is that element of identifying where your emotional needs are not being met, and therefore trying to meet them. So it's a slightly different approach. It's the same thing as Alex has been saying, but I suppose we've been through perhaps a more formal education process with Suffolk Mind, and that's been fabulously successful for us and very useful.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Ian, the thing about Mind, actually, that you mentioned there is a charity that does such a huge amount of good work, and lots of research as well. And I've got a stat actually from Mind here that I know that we've used at Archant, where we've done some work with our managers around mental health. 43% of people still don't feel able to open up about a mental health issue for fear of being treated differently, which I suppose in one respect is better than perhaps it used to be, but that's still quite a big percentage, isn't it? A question to you all: what would your advice be to anyone who feels like that? What would you say to them? Ian, you're on my screen at the minute. You give me your answer first of all. What would you say?
Well, mental health and emotional needs have increased no end, and people's awareness. I think the point is that people's awareness of their emotional needs are not being met. And I think 3 or 4 years ago they wouldn't have understood necessarily, or been able to articulate it. So it's never 43% is an enormous total. But I come back really to the education piece. If they start to understand why their emotional needs are not being met, Tom, then they can start to unravel which ones are not being met and what they can do themselves to help themselves to get back into emotional well-being state. So everyone has physical and emotional health, and it's going to be better or worse at any one point in time. But I think it is about education and helping people, for the vast majority, not all, are able to help themselves in many ways, give them the tools to be able to help themselves to get back to that better state.
Yeah, okay. Claire, I can see you nodding on the screen here. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And that is a lot of our work. A lot of the work that we do, we try and empower people to recognise the issues that they're struggling with, and look at ways that they can self-manage that and deal with that, and build the skills, I guess, to cope with that. And also with your previous question, like what could we do to get people to sort of talk about their mental health if they're a bit worried about that, or what can be done to help mental health. I think it is, again, it's just having that conversation and leading by example. I think it's all very well saying that we'll do this, we'll have policies and procedures, but it's seeing it through. It's actually sitting with it and being consistent and making sure that you're not just saying it as a tick box. You're not just saying it because you think that it should be done. If you don't understand something, or you're a bit nervous about having them conversations, there's so many resources out there. There's so much education. Online is a great resource. There's just loads of information out there, and there's places that can help. And it is difficult to speak up if asking for help. But I would definitely encourage anybody who does struggle, especially within work. We have a team of fantastic advisors, and it's just, once you find that courage, I think people will be surprised at how many other people have experienced some sort of effect to their mental health, and it really is good to talk. It really is.
It certainly is. A question that's come in from David on our feed, talking about visual cues. Now, if you're in the office and you see someone is physically not looking their best, their head is down, you know, someone who's outgoing is not contributing to meetings, or they just feel, you know, a bit down, you can see that straight away. You can deal with that. How do you deal with that if they're maybe 30 miles away on a screen? They might not even have their video camera on. And how do you stop it becoming a bigger issue? It's a great question. How do you deal with these visual cues? Who'd like to answer that?
I'd be happy to pick that one up. It is more difficult, obviously, because, like you said, there isn't the visual cues. So what do you do? And I think early on in the pandemic, it was about establishing some sort of an etiquette. So if people are new to using Teams or Zoom or something else, you know, and you could see that people were frequently leaving their video feed off, then the last thing you want to do is put them on the spot by saying, you know, Chris, your video feed is off. Can you switch it on, please? Because there could be many good reasons why they might not want to do that. It could be a technical reason. It could be another reason. It could just be a bad hair day. So it's not putting people on the spot, making them feel uncomfortable. But what I think the advice I would give is, certainly as managers, if you notice that, or if you notice that someone had previously regularly switched their video feed on and then had stopped doing that, is have a conversation, a one-to-one conversation with them, and say, you know, I've noticed this. Is everything okay? And be supportive in that way, because you don't have those immediate cues. It is a disadvantage, I guess, but it's about knowing that we can all support one another. So I think in that example, if we're on this kind of discussion or this kind of technology, it's just being mindful of that and having that conversation and picking it up in that way. And it comes back to what Alex, Claire, and we've all been saying about the importance of good communication. So whether you're a manager, whether you're a colleague, whoever it might be, it's just being mindful, being kind to other people as well, and picking those things up and having those conversations. I mean, there's no one easy way of doing it, but that's one of the things we've adopted really is looking for when someone perhaps hasn't had the video feed on, picking up on that, and then having those conversations. The other quick thing I might just say is that one of the things we did is, because of the fact we've all been working in different places, we don't have those coffee conversations, you know, that sort of thing that we talked about before. We put in place a rota where volunteers are phoning colleagues on a regular basis, not to talk about work, in fact, to talk about anything other than work, and you then have those sort of more social conversations. Sounds quite formal having a rota in place. It's kind of evolved over time. But that's just been a nice way of, you know, adapting what one of my colleagues put in place with the mental health network, but within our team as well. Just a nice way to have those conversations and to make contact with people that doesn't always have to feel like it's about work.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We've done a few initiatives ourselves at Archant, one of them being Coffee Roulette, which you may have heard of. I know it's done the rounds, but that's when I first heard of these two people in a roulette wheel being matched up to have a chat over Teams. I thought, well, that's, you know, it's never going to work. It would feel so artificial, you know, someone that you've never met before popping up on your screen. But it's worked hugely, and my personal Coffee Roulette was somebody that I'd never met before, and we ended up, you know, having about an hour and a half's natter about all kinds of things. So breaking down those barriers and bringing people together when they're apart, yeah, it's been hugely important. Kelly, though, raises a very good question, and that's about communication. And is there ever a time when we either over communicate or we ram in meeting after meeting after meeting? So we end up not being able to fit our work into our days, which then impacts negatively on our mental health. And I know people that, you know, have complained about that. They've been on Zoom or they've been on Teams from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m, one after another. They don't even have to, you know, have that 5-minute break when they pop from meeting room to meeting room. It's just clicking the button and then you're on to the next one. Is that a problem, do you think? Who'd like to chip in?
Yes, I think it is. I think that we let's face it, 14 months ago, no one knew what Zoom was. And now it's a verb. And that's what we all do. Yeah, there's and what people are losing, I think, is that sense of control over their lives. It's just time and time. There's no, you're losing your privacy to a certain degree, perhaps. You know, you're not commuting between meetings, you're not just having a chat, you're just having your own time. The intensity is certainly there. And I think amongst our team, we've had a lot of conversations about that. You know, the efficiency may have gone up in the last 6 to 9 months, but it's not actually sustainable or desirable. And I think there needs to be some honest conversations amongst the teams to say, yes, that's how we did work, but actually that's not how it may be efficient in the short term, but it's certainly not going to be efficient in the longer term. And so they're the conversations we're having, and we've certainly not got any policies around it at the moment. We're certainly trying to reduce the number of Zoom calls that anyone has in a day, because it's just not tenable for as I say, for the longer term. It's just not what people want. I think people have put up with it because we haven't had any bloody choice, have we? Let's face it. But now we're going to have choices, and I think that's when we've got to be very firm as leaders of businesses that we make the right choices in terms of how people use their time.
Good answer. Liz says, what boundaries should you put in place for your employees so that they're not working 24/7? And I'm guessing this is around employees that are going to be working from home, where it's also tempting, isn't it, to be on your email night and day, and not having that switch off time. Throwing it out to the panel.
I'll take it from a slightly different perspective, and then I'll let someone take it from the working from home perspective. But slightly different to the guys were saying, we've got a workforce that the majority of them can't work from home. They have to come to work, and they have to do their work in the homes with those people that we look after. We had a zero agency rule at the beginning of the pandemic to reduce any risk of infection. So we didn't want agency staff coming into our building who'd been to another building and possibly bring infection in with it. So we had an awful lot of staff picking up extra hours, more than their contracted hours. They've kind of all subbed in, helped out, but what we're kind of left with is a really exhausted workforce. And now everything's calmed down. We're at a kind of, everyone needs to just stop and take a bit of a break for themselves. So we're kind of looking at people's annual leave and making sure that people are taking the appropriate annual leave that they've not taken. Some people weren't able to use up all of their leave last year because they just, when the wave hit in kind of December, January time, they were just working to support the home and to support their colleagues, really. So we're having a real strong look at people's annual leave, holiday breaks now, and making sure that everyone has that sufficient time in. And even if, and things have lifted slightly now, but even when it was just the kind of still stay at home rule, they still had that time off just to be at home with their families, or just to be at home and kind of recover. Because we have got in social care a really generally tired workforce now.
Yeah, I bet. Thank you for that. And answering the question from a working from home perspective, who'd like to go on that?
I'm happy to answer that with our team. Again, we've also sort of tried to push for annual leave and encourage people to take that. And obviously, again, we've had to look at it flexibly, because some people didn't want to like have a week like they usually would, or a couple of weeks. So it's like, well, why not take a Friday or a Monday off and have a long weekend, or do it what works best for you, and sort of look at it differently. I think everything's changed now, so we're at this sort of time where we can like utilize the positives and look at what does work. And I think definitely, especially from my point of view, when we very first started, it was the expectations we had. It felt like we had something to prove, and it was like we had to be constantly productive. And like Ian said, it's not sustainable at all. So it's being sort of kind and factoring that in, and making sure you have those social aspects, maybe virtually, and the conversations. And within wellbeing, we also do have wellbeing days where we don't do work, we purely come together. We used to be obviously out in the community doing activities, but that lifted to virtual support, and that's outside organisations coming in, and it's just to again look at our own wellbeing and work in ways that way.
Layla Hobart asks a good question. Do any of you outsource your well-being or your mental health initiatives? And I guess if you're maybe a small organisation, or you're someone who doesn't know a lot about this stuff, the question would be, well, as I said earlier on, where do you start? Does any of you, talk to outside people and brought them in to help you in your organisations?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna fly the flag, so why shouldn't I? Yeah, we use Suffolk Mind all the time. the resources available on their website is truly phenomenal. And as an employer, there's a resource pack there that you can get on and start with. And if you require further training or in-depth training, it's there. I work in financial services. We do not pretend to be experts in mental health, and nor should we ever pretend to be experts in mental health. But we can, I think all organisations reach out to experts where required, and mental health is certainly one of them. For the SME, the larger organisations will have in-house capability, but for the vast majority of firms, I would suggest that they wouldn't have in-house capability because they're just not big enough.
Mm. So the supplies, the resources are there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go check them out. One last question for you all then before we wrap up the session, and it's looking forward. What more can be done to help mental health in the workplace? We've covered off a lot in this session, but as we look forward, as we learn from COVID, and as mental health takes even more of a centre stage going forward, what more can we all do as business leaders to make things even better? Let's start with Chris.
Well, I think you're right. I think there's a lot we can learn from what's worked well. There's a lot we can take with us. There's a lot of bad practice as well, and we've highlighted some of those things as well. I think for me, the big thing would be about that self-care element. So helping people to look at how they can support their own well-being as well. So clearly it's a joint thing. It's for the employer as much as the employee. Whether it's the Suffolk Minds model around emotional needs met, whether it's 5 ways to well-being, we use that as well. And I heard Ross Tandy talk about that this morning. Is supporting people to know that there are things they can do to look after their own well-being. So whether that's actively blocking time out for a lunch break, or to get outside and get a walk, and to model that as well. So that's where managers come in at the same time. Our director of public health is very good at that. There's always thing he models, get out, get away from the screen, for example, get away from the scrolling news headlines was some of the advice we gave out first time around, because you could be bombarded with information and distractions all the time. It's just supporting people to do that and understand how they can do that as well, and talk to people as well. That's so important. So that would be my top tip, if you like.
Yeah, leading by example. I mean, presenteeism is a bit of a problem, isn't it? But actually closing the laptop, getting out, making it known that you're taking your hour's lunch to go for that walk. Yeah, all good stuff. The same question. Let's go to Claire this time. What can we do moving forward to continuously improve mental health, Claire?
I think again, it's just keep talking about it, really. Just educate and attend, find and train and using resources, having events like this, keeping it quite high on the sort of the things that we're working towards. Within wellbeing, we do wellbeing in the workplace workshops, where we actually go into employers and we give them information about recognising stress and useful ways to deal with that. And I think again, it's just utilising, I guess, the support that's out there and really sort of embedding that within your day-to-day work and practice.
Alex, you're an award winner, your business. Add to that.
I think it's about treating everyone as an individual. Just because something you do might make you feel that way, that's not the same for somebody else. So everyone's resilience level is different. Different things affect people differently, and respecting that, and that your workforce are built up of unique individuals. So you can't throw a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to take the individual into account and have kind of multiple approaches.
Thank you. And Ian,
the second question, I was kind of touching on what Chris was saying earlier, but just the checking in. But we always say that the first "how you doing, are you okay" is a greeting rather than a question, because you always say, "Oh, hi, how you doing? Yeah, I'm good, thank you." That's kind of a greeting question, but always ask, "Are you okay?" twice. And it doesn't have to be as soon as you've kind of started the conversation with someone. It might be you've kind of done all that, you've done a bit of work chat, and then it's like, "So how are you doing?" That's when it's the actual question and you're kind of touching in on people. So
yeah, the subtlety is the difference. And Ian, final word to you.
I'll just finish off as the cynical one, because we're talking about mental health and emotional well-being with all great intentions. I think as employers, we should be writing down exactly what we are going to do, and then reviewing that list, or whatever it may be, on a regular basis. Because my fear is this is flavour of the month at the moment, and next year there may be another issue that takes the press. So I think this is the time to actually make some firm commitments as individuals and employers to actually make this part of the culture and not something we've just done because we happen to have a pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. That's been a really enjoyable 45 minutes and wise words from you all. Thank you very much to our panel, Ian White from Beckett Investment Management Group, Alex Ball from Stowe Healthcare, Chris Pyburn from Suffolk County Council, Claire Arnold from the Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust on mental health in the workplace.